I'm Mason, 32, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew what family meant. I built a career in tech, bought a $630,000 condo, and somehow became the villain in my parents' eyes. My brother Trevor was always the golden child while I was just the reliable backup plan. Last year at Trevor's birthday party, my mother smashed a champagne bottle against my head when I refused to hand over my property. They didn't realize what that moment would cost them. Before I dive into this story, where are you watching from today? Hit subscribe and like if you've ever had to stand up to family who tried to take what was yours. Growing up in our suburban home outside Seattle, the dynamic was clear from an early age. My parents, Richard and Diane, had different standards for Trevor and me. When I brought home A- grades, the response was always, "You could have done better if you applied yourself more." When Trevor brought home CS, they celebrated as if he'd won a Nobel Prize. "He's just not academically inclined," they'd say. "But he's so creative." This pattern continued throughout our childhood. School events highlighted the disparity. During my debate team finals, my parents showed up late and left early. For Trevor's mediocre performance as a tree in the school play, they brought flowers and took the entire family out for dinner. I learned quickly that achievements were my baseline expectation, not something worthy of celebration. "Mason's the responsible one," my mother would tell relatives at family gatherings, as if my reliability was somehow less impressive than Trevor's chaotic approach to life. "He doesn't need the same attention." By high school, I had internalized this message. I joined every academic club possible, maintained perfect grades, and secured a partial scholarship to University of Washington for computer science. My parents' reaction? "We always knew you'd figure out college yourself." Meanwhile, they spent countless hours helping Trevor apply to art schools, even though his portfolio consisted mainly of half-finished projects. College was a turning point. While many of my classmates had parents who helped with tuition or living expenses, I worked 3 jobs: morning shifts at a coffee shop, evening work at the university library, and weekend gigs doing basic web development for local businesses. Between classes and work, I averaged about 4 hours of sleep per night. Trevor, by contrast, dropped out of art school after 1 semester. My parents immediately welcomed him home, converted our basement into what they called his studio, and supported him while he found his path. This path apparently involved a lot of video games and failed attempts at becoming a YouTube personality. Despite the exhaustion, college provided distance from the family dynamics. I met new people who valued hard work and reliability. My professors recognized my talent for coding and connected me with internship opportunities. One of these internships led to my first job at Technova, a promising startup developing cloud security solutions. The timing was perfect. I joined Technova just as cloud computing was becoming essential for businesses. Our company grew rapidly, securing major clients and attracting significant venture capital. 3 years in, Technova went public. As an early employee with stock options, I suddenly found myself with more money than I'd ever imagined possessing. My first instinct wasn't to splurge on luxury items. Instead, I sought financial security through real estate. After careful research, I found a 2-bedroom condo in a developing area of Seattle that experts predicted would boom in the next decade. The $630,000 price tag was steep, but with my stock windfall and savings, I could afford the down payment and secure a reasonable mortgage. When I invited my parents to see the condo after closing, their reaction was telling. "This is quite an investment," my father said, walking through the open-concept living room. "Must be nice to have all this space just for yourself." My mother ran her hand along the quartz countertop. "You know, Trevor's been having such a hard time finding affordable housing." Even in what should have been a proud moment, the comparison to Trevor surfaced. Still, I brushed it off, excited about this milestone I'd achieved through my own efforts. That evening, as we had dinner in my new place, my father raised his glass. To Mason's success. May it benefit the whole family. I didn't fully grasp the implications of that toast until later. In their minds, my success wasn't just mine, it was a family resource to be redistributed as they saw fit, primarily toward Trevor. Meanwhile, Trevor's life continued its predictable pattern. He launched a handcrafted furniture business that folded after 3 months because he lost interest. Then came a food truck venture, funded by my parents remortgaging their house, which failed when Trevor decided the hours were too demanding. Each failure was met with understanding from my parents, who insisted he was still finding his passion. Throughout this time, I continued advancing at Technova, eventually becoming Director of Security Solutions. The company's growth meant my initial stock had multiplied in value several times over. It was during this period that I met Lauren at a tech conference. Unlike previous relationships that had fizzled due to my workaholic tendencies, Lauren understood ambition. As a software engineer herself, she respected the long hours sometimes required by our industry. What she couldn't understand, however, was my family's dynamic. They treat you like an ATM but Trevor like a precious jewel, she observed after our third family dinner together. Don't you see how messed up that is? I did see it. But years of conditioning had normalized it. They just worry about him more, I explained weakly. Lauren shook her head. They don't worry about him. They enable him. There's a difference. Her perspective was refreshing and uncomfortable. For the first time, I began questioning patterns I'd accepted my entire life. This questioning came just in time, as my parents began making more direct comments about my financial situation. What started as casual remarks about my fancy condo evolved into suggestions that I should help out the family more. Family takes care of family, my mother would say. Your grandfather would have expected it. They didn't specify what helping meant, but the implication was clear. My success should be funding Trevor's continued search for himself, now approaching his 30th birthday with nothing to show for it but a trail of abandoned projects and mounting debt. 6 months after purchasing my condo, the hints became explicit during a Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Trevor had just announced he was being evicted from his apartment because he'd spent his rent money on equipment for his newest venture, artisanal hot sauce production. It's an investment, he insisted, as if previous investments hadn't all ended the same way. As we ate dessert, my mother casually mentioned, You know, Mason, your condo has that second bedroom you never use. I use it as my home office, I replied. I work from home 3 days a week. My father joined in. Surely you could work from the living room temporarily. Just until Trevor gets back on his feet. I put down my fork. Are you suggesting Trevor should move in with me? It would be such a help, my mother said. And you've always been good at keeping him on track. This was their pattern, presenting Trevor's problems as opportunities for me to demonstrate family loyalty. I'd fallen for it many times before. Loaning him money that was never repaid, helping him move when ventures failed, editing business plans that were abandoned weeks later. I don't think that would work, I said carefully. Our lifestyles aren't compatible. My father's expression hardened. Meaning what? Your brother isn't good enough for your fancy condo? That's not what I said. But I bought that place as an investment, and for my own peace of mind. I need my workspace. Always about you and your needs. My mother sighed dramatically. Meanwhile, your brother could be homeless. He won't be homeless, I pointed out. He'll move back here like he always does. Trevor, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Some of us haven't had everything handed to us on a silver platter, Mason. The irony of this statement was so stunning I almost laughed. Instead, I excused myself early, driving home with a knot in my stomach that had become all too familiar after family gatherings. The situation escalated 2 weeks later when my parents invited me to lunch, conspicuously without Trevor. Over appetizers, they revealed the true extent of his financial troubles. He owes some people money, my father explained vaguely. What people? How much money? I asked. My mother looked around the restaurant nervously before whispering. Gambling debts. About $70,000. I nearly choked on my water. 70,000? Since when does Trevor gamble? It started as poker nights with friends, my father said. Then online betting. He thought he could win back what he lost. The classic gambler's fallacy. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache forming. And what does this have to do with me? My parents exchanged glances before my father spoke. We've been thinking. Your condo has appreciated quite a bit since you bought it, right? Property values in my neighborhood had indeed risen about 15% in the last year. A fact I'd mentioned during a previous conversation. If you sold it, my mother continued, you could pay off Trevor's debts, have enough to make a down payment on another place for yourself, and maybe even have some left over to help him start fresh. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline that never came. You're serious? Family helps family, my father said, repeating the mantra they'd used throughout my life whenever they wanted me to sacrifice for Trevor. No, I said simply. No? My mother looked genuinely shocked, as if the possibility of refusal had never occurred to her. No. I'm not selling my home to bail Trevor out of gambling debts. My father leaned forward, voice low but intense. We've supported you your entire life. Put you through college. You didn't put me through college, I interrupted. I worked 3 jobs and got scholarships. We gave you a roof over your head. Food, clothes. You did the legal minimum required of parents, I said, surprising myself with my directness. And I'm grateful for that. But I'm not responsible for Trevor's bad decisions. Not this time. The argument that followed was ugly. My mother cried. My father brought up every sacrifice they'd ever made. I stood my ground, but left feeling like the villain they portrayed me to be. Over the next few weeks, I discovered they'd been sharing their version of events with the extended family. Cousins sent me messages asking why I wouldn't help Trevor in his time of need. My aunt called to remind me of family obligations. Even my grandmother, usually the reasonable one, suggested I was being unnecessarily harsh. Lauren was my rock during this period. They're manipulating you and the entire family, she pointed out. Notice how they never mention the gambling? In their story, you're just being selfish for no reason. She was right. In the narrative my parents were spreading, Trevor had vague, financial troubles, and I was refusing to help despite having the means. The specifics, that he had accumulated massive gambling debts, and they expected me to sell my home to cover them, were conveniently omitted. The situation created a rift between us that lasted several months. I stopped attending Sunday dinners. Holiday gatherings became tense affairs that I sometimes skipped entirely. My parents left guilt-inducing voicemails. Trevor sent angry texts accusing me of thinking I was better than the family. Eventually, a fragile peace was established. Not because anything was resolved, but because Trevor found another solution to his problems. My parents took out yet another home equity loan to pay his debts, under the condition that he attend Gamblers Anonymous. Whether he actually went to meetings, I couldn't say. By the time Trevor's 30th birthday approached, we had settled into an uneasy truce. I still declined Sunday dinners but agreed to attend family events. Conversation stayed superficial, avoiding any mention of money, property, or Trevor's latest schemes. When my mother called to invite Lauren and me to Trevor's birthday celebration, I hesitated. It would mean so much to him, she insisted. He's really turning things around. Lauren was skeptical. Nothing's been resolved, she warned. They're just pretending the conflict never happened. Maybe things have cooled down, I suggested, wanting to believe it. Maybe we can move forward. How wrong I was. Trevor's birthday fell on a perfect June Saturday. Lauren and I arrived at my parents' house carrying a thoughtfully chosen gift, a high-quality leather notebook and pen set for the screenwriting course Trevor had supposedly enrolled in. Whether this new interest would last longer than previous ones remained to be seen, but I was making an effort. The front yard was decorated with balloons and a "Happy 30th Birthday" banner. Cars lined the street. My parents had invited the extended family and Trevor's eclectic assortment of friends. Music and laughter spilled from the open windows. "Ready?" Lauren squeezed my hand. Sensing my apprehension, I nodded, plastering on a smile as we walked up the path. My mother greeted us at the door with practiced enthusiasm. "Mason! Lauren! So glad you could make it." She hugged us both, the picture of familial warmth, as if our last conversation hadn't ended with her in tears and me being called ungrateful. Inside, the house was crowded with familiar faces. My father manned the grill on the back patio, wearing an apron that read, "World's Greatest Dad," a Father's Day gift from Trevor years ago. He acknowledged me with a nod but made no move to greet me properly. Trevor was holding court in the living room, regaling his friends with a story that had them all laughing. When he spotted me, he broke into a wide smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The prodigal brother returns," he announced, coming over to clap me on the shoulder. His breath already carried the distinct scent of alcohol, though it was barely 3 in the afternoon. "Happy birthday," I said, handing him our gift. He made a show of opening it immediately, exclaiming over how perfect it was for his new writing career. "Always thoughtful, my big brother. The reliable one." There was a subtle edge to the compliment that made me uncomfortable. But I let it pass. This was his day, and I was determined to keep the peace. The next hour passed in deceptive normalcy. I chatted with cousins, caught up with an uncle I hadn't seen in months, and helped my father at the grill when he reluctantly accepted my offer of assistance. Lauren engaged in conversation with some of Trevor's friends who worked in tech-adjacent fields. The tension I'd anticipated seemed absent, replaced by the ordinary rhythms of a family gathering. When dinner was served, we all crowded around the long table set up in the backyard. My mother had prepared Trevor's favorites: ribs, loaded potato salad, and corn on the cob. Wine and beer flowed freely, adding to the festive atmosphere. Then came the toasts. My father went first. His speech full of pride in his younger sons, creativity, and resilience, code for Trevor's inability to maintain either employment or relationships. Various friends followed with anecdotes about Trevor's generosity and free spirit, traits enabled by my parents' financial support. Finally, Trevor himself stood, champagne flute in hand. He thanked everyone for coming, making special mention of friends who had been there through the rough patches. Then his gaze fixed on me. "And to my big brother Mason, the family success story." He raised his glass higher. Always climbing the corporate ladder, always making the responsible choice. The brother who has everything: great job, beautiful girlfriend, fancy condo. His smile tightened. "Thanks for showing me exactly what kind of person I don't want to be." A uncomfortable silence fell over the gathering. Trevor laughed, breaking the tension. "Just kidding, bro. We can't all be boring corporate drones." People chuckled, relieved at the apparent joke, but Lauren and I exchanged glances. The barb had been deliberate, the resentment real. After dinner, as guests mingled and migrated between backyard and house, my parents cornered me on the side patio. Lauren had gone inside to use the bathroom, leaving me momentarily alone, a tactical error. I soon realized. "We need to talk about the condo situation," my father said without preamble. I sighed. "I thought we were past this." "Trevor's making real progress," my mother said earnestly. "He's serious about this screenwriting course. He's been sober for 2 months. Given the beer I'd watched him consume all afternoon, this was clearly a lie. I chose not to point this out. "That's great," I said instead. I'm glad he's doing well. He needs a stable environment to continue his recovery. My father continued. Our basement isn't ideal. There are too many memories down there. Memories of failed projects and binges, no doubt. What are you suggesting? My mother touched my arm. We've been thinking about your offer to let him stay in your second bedroom. I never made that offer, I said carefully. In fact, I specifically said it wouldn't work. Don't be pedantic. Mason, my father snapped. You know what we mean. I really don't, I replied, feeling the conversation slipping into familiar, dangerous territory. My mother's voice took on the pleading tone I knew well. Just for a few months. Until he finishes the course and finds a proper job. You're barely ever home anyway. Always working or out with Lauren. My home office is in that second bedroom. I reminded them. I need that space for work. You can afford one of those co-working spaces. My father dismissed. Someone in your position. My position? You mean the position I worked for? The position that you now feel entitled to leverage for Trevor's benefit? My father's face darkened. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me that wasn't your basic parental duty? I challenged, years of resentment finally surfacing. When have you ever supported my goals the way you've supported Trevor's? We've always been there for you. My mother insisted, tears welling in her eyes, her standard response when confronted. No, you've always expected me to be there for you and for Trevor. It's not the same thing. My father stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think you're so much better than us with your tech job and your expensive condo. But family is family. You don't turn your back on blood. I haven't turned my back on anyone, I said. I've just set boundaries. Boundaries, he scoffed. Selfish is what it is. Pure selfishness. Richard. My mother placed a restraining hand on his arm, noticing other guests glancing our way. Not here. But my father was too worked up to stop. Your brother needs help, and you're living alone in a 2-bedroom condo that you don't even need. I do need it, I insisted. And even if I didn't, it's mine. I bought it with money I earned. You ungrateful. He cut himself off, fists clenched. I should have walked away then. Should have found Lauren and left the party. Instead, I made the mistake of continuing the argument. I am grateful for the good things you've done, I said, trying to de-escalate. But that doesn't mean I owe you my property. Trevor appeared suddenly, drawn by the rising voices. What's going on? Your brother, my father said bitterly, is refusing to help you. Again. Trevor's expression hardened. Still too good for family, Mason? That's not what this is about. I began, but Trevor cut me off. It's exactly what it's about. You've always thought you're better than us. Other guests were now openly watching the confrontation. I spotted Lauren returning from the house, her expression alarmed as she assessed the situation. I should go, I said, turning to leave. What happened next occurred so quickly I had no time to react. My mother, still clutching her champagne bottle, swung it at the side of my head in a moment of blind rage. The bottle connected with a sickening crack. I felt a sharp pain, then warm liquid running down my face and neck. There were screams, Lauren's voice among them. Someone shouted to call an ambulance. My vision blurred as I stumbled backward, caught by unfamiliar hands. Through the haze of shock and pain, I saw my mother standing frozen, the broken bottle neck still in her hand. Her expression a mixture of horror and something else, something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. My friend Brandon, who I hadn't even realized was at the party, had his phone out, recording the aftermath. Evidence, he said grimly when our eyes met. This is assault. Lauren pushed through the crowd, her face pale with shock. Oh my God, Mason! She pressed a cloth napkin against my bleeding head. The rest was chaos, people shouting, my father trying to take Brandon's phone, Trevor yelling that I had provoked them. Lauren and Brandon helped me to the car, ignoring my parents' contradictory commands to wait and demands that I leave. The emergency room was a blur of bright lights, concerned faces, and paperwork. 7 stitches to close the gash along my temple. Tests for concussion. Police officers taking statements and viewing Brandon's video. "Do you want to press charges?" one officer asked as a doctor finished bandaging my head. I looked at Lauren, whose expression told me everything I needed to know about the severity of what had happened. This wasn't a family disagreement that got out of hand. This was assault. "Yes," I said, my decision made. "I want to press charges." The following days passed in a haze of pain medication and disbelief. Physical recovery was straightforward enough, follow-up appointments, keeping the wound clean, managing headaches from the mild concussion. The emotional aftermath proved far more complicated. Lauren took time off work to stay with me, fielding calls from concerned friends and running interference with family members who'd witnessed the incident. My phone filled with messages I couldn't bring myself to read, some expressing shock and support, others no doubt continuing to blame me for provoking the situation. "You didn't do anything wrong," Lauren reminded me repeatedly. "They assaulted you for refusing to give them your property. In what world is that justified?" 3 days after the party, I finally checked my voicemail. Most messages were from friends checking on me, but several were from my parents. Their tone evolved from initial shock. "We don't know what came over us," to justification. "You pushed us to our breaking point," to accusation. "This is tearing the family apart, and it's your fault." Trevor's messages were worse, slurred, angry rants about how I'd ruined his birthday, and always had to make everything about myself. In one particularly disturbing voicemail, he suggested I'd deliberately provoked our mother to make them look bad. "It's classic Darvo," my therapist Dr. Phillips explained during our emergency session. "Deny attack. Reverse victim and offender. They can't accept responsibility, so they're making you the villain of their story." I'd started therapy 6 months earlier at Lauren's suggestion, primarily to address workplace stress. Now those sessions became critical to processing the family trauma I'd normalized for decades. "What's most concerning," Dr. Phillips continued, "is that this physical violence didn't come from nowhere. It's an escalation of the emotional abuse you've described throughout your life." Emotional abuse? The term felt too strong. Persistent favoritism, financial exploitation, guilt manipulation, scapegoating. She listed off the patterns I'd shared over our months of sessions. "These are forms of emotional abuse, Mason." The champagne bottle was just the first time it became physical. Meanwhile, the legal process moved forward. My parents received a court summons for the assault charge. The responding officers had recommended a restraining order, which I obtained with Brandon's video evidence. The order prevented my parents from contacting me directly or coming within 100 feet of my home or workplace. With physical distance enforced, I found mental clarity returning. I began methodically organizing the documents related to my condo, ensuring everything was secure. During this process, I made a startling discovery buried in old emails. My parents had once asked me to add Trevor as a co-owner on my property, for tax purposes. I'd refused at the time, but the request now took on a sinister dimension. Had they been planning to transfer my property to Trevor all along? This discovery prompted me to dig deeper into my family's financial situation. For years, my parents had presented themselves as financially secure. Their house was supposedly paid off, a point of pride they mentioned frequently. They'd retired comfortably from their respective careers in education and insurance. Yet they had repeatedly taken out loans to fund Trevor's ventures. Where was that money coming from if they were as stable as they claimed? I hired a private investigator named Melissa, explaining my concerns and providing what information I had. Her findings shocked me. "Your parents have been taking equity out of their house for years," she explained, showing me county records. "They've refinanced multiple times and currently owe almost as much as the property is worth, despite having supposedly paid it off 15 years ago. Furthermore, they'd recently missed 2 mortgage payments, putting them at risk of foreclosure. They've been maintaining appearances, Melissa continued, but they're essentially broke. Almost all their retirement savings have been depleted. The money, as I suspected, had gone to Trevor, bailing him out of debts, funding failed businesses, supporting him during periods of unemployment. They'd mortgaged their future for his present. As this information sank in, Melissa delivered another bombshell. There's something else you should know. I found records of a family trust established by your grandfather before he died. I vaguely remembered the trust. My grandfather had set it up to provide for my grandmother after his passing, with the remainder to be split between my father and his sister. The interesting part, Melissa continued, is that you're listed as a secondary beneficiary and conservator under certain conditions. I frowned. What conditions? If the primary beneficiaries, your father and aunt, demonstrate financial mismanagement that threatens the trust assets. The documents Melissa provided were complex, requiring translation from legal jargon. I took them to a trust attorney named Samuel Collins. After reviewing everything, Samuel looked up with raised eyebrows. Your grandfather was quite thorough. He apparently anticipated potential issues. What does it mean for me? I asked. The family home was purchased with trust funds, Samuel explained. Your grandfather intended it to provide security for generations. The repeated equity extraction your parents have engaged in violates the terms of the trust. And because I'm listed as conservator, you have standing to petition for control of the trust assets, including the house, especially given their recent delinquency on payments, which threatens the asset itself. I sat back, stunned by the implications. I could force the sale of their house. Samuel nodded. Legally, yes. The trust gives you that authority if you choose to exercise it. The moral question weighed heavily. Did I have the right to take their home, even if legally justified? Would doing so make me the villain they already believed me to be? I spent days wrestling with the decision, discussing it endlessly with Lauren and Dr. Phillips. They tried to take your home from you, Lauren pointed out. And when you refused, they physically attacked you. Taking their house seems so extreme, I said. More extreme than smashing a bottle against your head? Than trying to manipulate you into giving up your condo? Than draining your grandfather's trust against his explicit wishes? Dr. Phillips took a more measured approach. This isn't about revenge, Mason. It's about boundaries and consequences. What message does it send if their behavior has no real impact? The turning point came when I received a letter from my parents' attorney, demanding I drop the assault charges and pay for Trevor's therapy, as he was traumatized by witnessing the incident. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just more demands and attempts to shift blame. That evening, I made my decision. They tried to take what I built. I told Lauren, now I'll take what they thought was theirs. The next morning, I called Samuel and instructed him to begin the process. Samuel Collins' office occupied the 12th floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise, with views of Elliott Bay that probably accounted for his eye-watering hourly rate. But as I sat across from him discussing the intricacies of trust law, I knew the expense was justified. We'll need to file a petition with the probate court, he explained, organizing documents into neat piles. As conservator, you're alleging breach of fiduciary duty by the current trustees, your parents. The legal strategy was methodical. First, we would document the series of home equity loans and refinancing that had drained the property's value. Then we would demonstrate that these actions violated my grandfather's explicit instructions that the house remain a family asset, not a piggy bank for Trevor's schemes. Given the missed mortgage payments and imminent foreclosure risk, we can request emergency conservatorship, Samuel continued. That would give you immediate authority to prevent further financial damage to the trust asset. And then what? I asked. Then you have options. You could assume the mortgage payments yourself to prevent foreclosure. You could work out a payment plan with your parents. Or I could sell the house. I finished. Samuel nodded. That would be within your legal rights as conservator. The moral complexity hadn't diminished, but my resolve had strengthened. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about finally establishing consequences for behaviors my family had normalized for decades. To execute the plan effectively, I enlisted the help of my friend Marcus, who worked in high-end real estate. Over coffee at a quiet cafe far from my usual haunts, I explained the situation. So you want to force the sale of your parents' house, he summarized. But you don't want them to know you're behind it until it's too late. Exactly. Samuel says I can operate through an LLC to maintain privacy during the initial legal proceedings. Marcus considered this. I can help with the sale part once you have legal control. The market in their neighborhood is hot right now. Houses are selling above asking price within days. He pulled out his tablet, showing me recent comparable sales. My parents' house, even with its depleted equity, would likely sell for around $900,000. After paying off the existing mortgage and liens, there would be perhaps $200,000 remaining, far less than they believed they had, but enough to secure modest housing elsewhere. They'll need to downsize significantly, Marcus noted. They've been living beyond their means for years, I replied. Reality was going to catch up eventually, with Samuel handling the legal front and Marcus preparing for the eventual sale. I established Northwest Property Solutions LLC as the entity through which I would exercise my conservator rights. This extra layer of privacy would prevent my parents from immediately realizing I was behind the proceedings. The paperwork was filed on a Tuesday. By Friday, my parents had been served with legal notices informing them of the petition for conservatorship, the allegations of trust violations, and the upcoming court date. The documents didn't mention me by name, referring only to the designated conservator under the trust provisions. Their panic was immediate and predictable. My phone exploded with calls and texts despite the restraining order. I forwarded each violation to my attorney without reading the messages. Lauren monitored social media, reporting that Trevor was posting vague threats and accusations about traitors and family backstabbers, though he clearly didn't understand the legal mechanism at work. He assumed it was the bank taking action due to the missed payments. Brandon, whose video evidence had been crucial in obtaining the restraining order, called to warn me that my father had approached him demanding he delete any evidence related to the party incident. I told him the video was already with the police and your lawyer, Brandon said. He didn't take it well. Thank you for standing firm, I replied, grateful for friends who understood the reality of the situation rather than the narrative my parents were undoubtedly spreading. With the restraining order in place, my parents resorted to enlisting family members as messengers. My aunt called, claiming she just wanted to understand what was happening with Richard and Diane. My cousin sent emails with subject lines like, "Family emergency," that I deleted unread. I provided Samuel with documentation of these apparent attempts to circumvent the restraining order. He added them to our growing file, noting that such behavior would only strengthen our case before the judge. The court date arrived 3 weeks after filing. I attended with Samuel, sitting silently as he presented our evidence of financial mismanagement. My parents and their hastily retained attorney seemed unprepared for the thoroughness of our documentation, every refinance, every equity loan, every missed payment meticulously catalogued and contrasted with my grandfather's explicit trust provisions. The trust clearly states that the property was intended to provide generational security, Samuel argued. Instead, the respondents have systematically extracted equity to fund non-essential expenses, primarily supporting their adult son's unsuccessful business ventures and personal debts. My parents' attorney attempted to portray them as well-meaning parents helping a struggling child, an argument that might have garnered sympathy in another context but held little weight in trust law. When the judge asked if they disputed the financial records presented, their attorney could only argue that they had intended to restore the equity when circumstances improved. The judge's decision was swift and unambiguous. The court finds clear evidence of breach of fiduciary duty, she declared. Temporary conservatorship is granted to the petitioner as designated in the original trust documents. Only then. As Samuel submitted the final paperwork revealing Northwest Property Solutions LLC's connection to me, did my parents realize who had initiated the proceedings. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock to fury as understanding dawned. My father half rose from his seat, pointing at me until his attorney firmly pulled him back down. My mother covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. I maintained a neutral expression, focusing on the judge as she continued outlining the terms of the conservatorship. I now had legal authority to make decisions regarding the trust property, including the power to sell it if necessary to protect the remaining asset value. As we left the courtroom, my parents and their attorney huddled in urgent conversation. I didn't look back, walking steadily beside Samuel toward the elevator. 60 days, Samuel reminded me as the doors closed. That's how long the notice to vacate needs to be. Are you sure you want to proceed with the sale? I thought of the champagne bottle connecting with my skull. Of decades of manipulation and favoritism. Of my grandfather's wishes systematically undermined to enable Trevor's irresponsibility. Yes, I said. Send the notice. The official notice to vacate was delivered the following day by certified mail, giving my parents 60 days to find new housing and remove their belongings. Samuel also filed the necessary paperwork to begin the sale process, with Marcus handling the real estate aspects. In the weeks that followed, I maintained my distance. Protected by the restraining order and focused on my own healing, both physical and emotional. The cut on my temple was healing nicely, though it would leave a scar. The psychological wounds were taking longer to address, but Dr. Phillips assured me I was making progress. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, she reminded me during one particularly difficult session. It's necessary for healthy relationships. Does that apply when the boundary is you have to leave your house? I asked Riley. The boundary was you can't have my property, she corrected. Everything that followed was a consequence of their refusal to respect that boundary, including the assault. Lauren remained my steadfast support, never questioning my decision even as I sometimes questioned it myself. You're not taking anything they earned, she pointed out during moments of doubt. You're protecting what your grandfather intended to preserve. As the 60-day mark approached, Marcus reported that prospective buyers were already expressing interest based on preliminary listings. We'll have multiple offers within days of it hitting the market, he predicted. The final notice was delivered 2 weeks before the deadline, reiterating the requirement to vacate and outlining the consequences of noncompliance. Only then did my parents' attorney reach out to Samuel, requesting a meeting to discuss potential alternatives. They want to negotiate, Samuel informed me. Specifically, they're asking for an additional 30 days and the right to purchase the property themselves. With what money? I asked, knowing the extent of their financial situation. They don't specify. My guess is they're hoping for sympathy or trying to buy time. I considered the request briefly. No extensions. As for purchasing, they can submit an offer like any other buyer if they have the financing. Samuel relayed my response. The counteroffer was immediate. Trevor would move out immediately if my parents could stay. Again, I declined. The trust has been violated. The property is being sold. These are the consequences of their actions. The negotiations continued without progress until the final week, when reality apparently set in. Moving trucks appeared at the house. Social media posts from distant relatives mentioned helping poor Richard and Diane relocate to a 2-bedroom apartment across town. On the 60th day, Marcus conducted a walkthrough of the now vacant property. They've removed everything, he reported. Some minor damage to walls from art being taken down, but nothing that will affect the sale. The house went on the market the following Monday. By Wednesday, we had 7 offers, all above asking price. The highest bid came in at $965,000, nearly $70,000 above our listing price. The sale closed with remarkable speed, the new owners eager to take possession. After the mortgage was satisfied and closing costs paid, the remaining proceeds, just over $220,000, were placed in a new trust account under my conservatorship. My parents' dream home, the status symbol they had leveraged beyond recognition to fund Trevor's failures, now belonged to a young family with 2 small children. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house would once again serve its intended purpose as a family home rather than a financial resource to be drained. The final step in executing the plan came when Samuel delivered official documentation to my parents and Trevor, outlining the sale proceeds and the new trust arrangements. The funds would remain in trust, with conservative investments generating modest returns. My parents would receive monthly distributions of $1,200, enough to supplement other retirement income but insufficient to support Trevor's lifestyle or ventures. Trevor himself would receive nothing directly. Instead, a smaller portion was set aside for legitimate education expenses if he ever pursued genuine career development. The terms were explicit. No lump sum distributions, no advances against future payments, no exceptions for emergencies, without thorough documentation. The manipulative financial patterns that had defined our family dynamic for decades were now structurally impossible. My revenge was complete, not through taking everything from them, but by imposing the financial reality they had been avoiding for years. They would have shelter and basic needs met, but the era of bailing out Trevor at the expense of long-term security was over. From the safety of my condo, I monitored the aftermath through carefully maintained distance. The "for sale" sign appeared in front of my parents' house exactly as scheduled, accompanied by professional photographs online showcasing the 4-bedroom colonial where I'd grown up. The property listing described it as a well-maintained family home in an established neighborhood. Technically accurate, if incomplete. Friends and acquaintances became my eyes and ears, providing updates without requiring direct contact. Brandon drove past occasionally, reporting the progression from "for sale" to "pending" to "sold" in just 11 days. "Market's hot," he texted along with a photo of the final sign. "Your timing was perfect." My parents' attempts to contact me continued despite the restraining order. They enlisted increasingly distant connections, my mother's hairdresser's daughter, my father's former colleague, even Lauren's coworker, to convey messages ranging from desperate pleas to thinly veiled threats. "They cornered me in the grocery store," my cousin Ellie reported during one of our infrequent calls. "Aunt Diane was crying about how they have nowhere to go, even though everyone knows they've already signed a lease on that apartment near the community college." "What did you tell them?" I asked. "That they should have thought about consequences before hitting you with a bottle," she replied bluntly. "I saw the video, Mason. There's no defending that." Not everyone in the family shared Ellie's perspective. The family divided into factions, those who had witnessed the assault or seen Brandon's video versus those who accepted my parents' narrative of an ungrateful son cruelly punishing elderly parents over a misunderstanding. Melanie, the realtor Marcus had assigned to the actual sale, kept me updated on the transaction details. "The new owners are delighted," she reported after closing. "They've been looking in this neighborhood for months. Their daughter starts kindergarten at the elementary school in September." There was poetic justice in knowing a young family would create new memories in the house, replacing the dysfunction of its previous occupants with something healthier. Trevor's reaction played out publicly on social media, his posts becoming increasingly erratic as the reality of the situation sank in. First came vague references to betrayal and backstabbing. Then explicit rants about me, filled with accusations and misrepresentations. His fatal mistake came when he posted about the birthday party incident, claiming I had provoked our mother and exaggerated the injury for sympathy. Brandon, who rarely posted anything contentious online, broke his silence by uploading a 15-second clip from his longer video, just enough to show my mother swinging the bottle and the immediate aftermath. His caption was simple: "Facts matter. Assault is assault." The video went viral within our extended social circle. Trevor deleted his original posts, but screenshots preserved his false narrative alongside Brandon's irrefutable evidence. The fallout was swift. Mutual acquaintances who had been fence-sitting suddenly reached out with messages of support. Relatives who had accused me of overreacting fell silent. My parents' carefully constructed image as devoted, put upon parents of an ungrateful son crumbled in 15 seconds of unedited footage. Lauren monitored these developments, filtering information to protect me from the worst of the vitriol, while keeping me informed of significant developments. "Trevor's moved in with them," she reported one evening over dinner. "Apparently the apartment management won't add him to the lease because of his credit history." I raised an eyebrow. "So all three of them are in a 2-bedroom apartment?" "Karma has a sense of humor," she replied with a slight smile. "The controlled monthly distributions from the trust began as scheduled." Samuel provided regular reports confirming that the funds were being dispersed as designed, enough to supplement other income sources but insufficient to finance Trevor's schemes or bail him out of new difficulties. "They've requested an increase twice," Samuel noted during our quarterly review. "Both times citing unexpected medical expenses that turned out to be Trevor's therapy bills." "Denied?" I confirmed. "As per your instructions. Medical expenses for the trust beneficiaries, your parents, would qualify for consideration. Trevor's expenses do not." 3 months after the sale, I encountered my parents unexpectedly at Marcello's, a restaurant Lauren and I frequented. We were celebrating her promotion to lead developer when my parents entered and were seated across the dining room. The moment they spotted us was painfully obvious, my mother's sharp intake of breath audible even across the crowded space, my father's face darkening with anger. I tensed, preparing to leave if necessary. Lauren squeezed my hand. "The restraining order is still active. They can't approach us. Despite this legal protection." My father rose halfway from his seat before my mother pulled him back down. Their heated whispers carried enough for nearby diners to turn and stare. We tried to continue our meal, but the weight of their glares made it impossible to celebrate properly. When my father made a show of speaking to the manager while pointing in our direction, we decided to leave, asking for our dessert to go. As we passed near their table, keeping well beyond the 100-foot requirement but within earshot, my father couldn't resist a parting shot. "Proud of yourself?" he hissed. "Throwing your parents out on the street?" I kept walking, but Lauren paused. "The 2-bedroom apartment you're living in hardly qualifies as the street," she replied coolly. "And pride has nothing to do with consequences." Several diners witnessed this exchange, including a former colleague who later messaged me expressing shock at my father's behavior. "I always thought your parents were so reasonable based on how you talked about them," she wrote. "Now I understand why you've been distant lately." This pattern continued over the following months, my parents creating scenes in public places, apparently hoping to shame me into rescinding the trust restrictions. Each incident only reinforced the correctness of my decision and damaged their standing further among those who witnessed their behavior. Trevor, meanwhile, cycled through his usual pattern of schemes and failures, but with a critical difference: no financial safety net beyond the modest trust distributions to my parents. He briefly worked at a coffee shop before being fired for unreliability. He started a podcast that lasted 3 episodes. He tried selling homemade candles online with predictable results. Without unlimited financial support, these failures had real consequences. His car was repossessed. His credit card debt went to collections. For the first time in his life, Trevor faced the actual results of his choices rather than being insulated by parental intervention. 6 months after the sale, the legal proceedings for the assault charge concluded. My mother accepted a plea deal, 6 months probation, anger management classes, and community service in exchange for no jail time. The conviction was real, however, creating a permanent record of the incident that no amount of family revisionism could erase. Throughout this period, I focused on rebuilding my life without the constant drain of toxic family dynamics. Lauren moved into my condo, transforming it from a space associated with family conflict to our shared home. I received a significant promotion at work, taking on leadership of a new cybersecurity initiative. We even adopted a rescue dog named Cooper, whose uncomplicated affection provided a healing counterpoint to the complex emotions surrounding my family. Dr. Phillips helped me process the complex emotions, the lingering guilt, the occasional doubts, the unexpected grief for relationships that had been unhealthy but were nonetheless part of my identity. Family estrangement is rarely clean or simple, she observed during one session. It's normal to feel conflicted even when you know you've made the right decision. I don't regret setting the boundary, I told her. I regret that it took violence for me to recognize how necessary it was. The physical scar on my temple faded gradually from angry red to a thin white line, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it, but permanently part of me. It seemed an apt metaphor for the experience itself. 6 months after my mother's conviction, I sat on my condo balcony watching the sunset over Seattle's skyline, absently tracing the faint scar at my temple, a habit I developed during moments of reflection. Cooper dozed at my feet, occasionally twitching in his sleep. The wounds, both physical and emotional, had largely healed, though either without leaving marks. The 7 stitches had left a thin white line that caught the light at certain angles. The emotional trauma had similarly faded but remained part of me, a permanent reminder of hard lessons learned. Inside, Lauren was on a work call, her voice drifting through the open sliding door as she finalized details for her team's latest project. Her presence in my life had been unwavering throughout the ordeal, offering perspective when I wavered and support when I struggled. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Phillips confirming our monthly session. Our work had shifted from crisis management to deeper exploration of the family patterns I'd normalized throughout my life. Breaking generational cycles is hard but worthwhile work, she often reminded me. The trust continued operating as designed, providing my parents with basic financial support, while preventing the enabling behaviors that had defined our family dynamic. Samuel's quarterly reports indicated they had adapted to their new circumstances. My father taking a part-time job as a school security guard, my mother selling handmade jewelry at local markets. Trevor's path had been rockier. Without unlimited financial support, he'd cycled through several jobs, never lasting more than a few weeks. His social media presence had dwindled as reality replaced the carefully curated image he'd maintained when my parents funded his lifestyle. I'd set aside a portion of the house sale proceeds, $50,000, in a separate account that even Samuel didn't know about. It wasn't part of the trust, but a personal fund I maintained in case Trevor ever demonstrated genuine change. Not to enable more self-destruction, but to support authentic growth if that day ever came. Lauren joined me on the balcony, wrapping her arms around me from behind. "Penny for your thoughts?" I smiled, covering her hands with mine. "Just reflecting. It's been exactly a year since Trevor's birthday party. A lot has changed," she observed. "Everything has changed," I corrected gently. 2 weeks after that anniversary, Lauren and I took Cooper for his evening walk along the waterfront. As the sun set over Elliott Bay, painting the sky in dramatic oranges and purples, I led her to a quiet bench overlooking the water. "This is where we had our third date," she recalled, smiling at the memory. "You remember?" "Of course. You were so nervous you spilled coffee all over yourself." I laughed. "Not my smoothest moment." We sat watching the ferries cross the bay, Cooper contentedly exploring nearby bushes on his extended leash. The moment felt perfect, peaceful in a way I'd rarely experienced before establishing boundaries with my family. I have something to ask you, I said, reaching into my pocket. Lauren's eyes widened as I produced the small velvet box and dropped to one knee. You've seen me at my worst and somehow still love me at my best, I said. The words I'd rehearsed suddenly seeming inadequate. You helped me understand what real family should be. Would you marry me? Her yes was immediate. Her tears happy as I slipped the ring onto her finger, a vintage sapphire that had belonged to my maternal grandmother, the one family heirloom I'd kept from my previous life. That evening, as we celebrated with champagne, safely poured into glasses, a detail Lauren noted with gentle humor, my phone lit up with an unexpected name, Trevor. I hesitated before opening the message, bracing for accusations or demands. Instead, I found something I'd never expected, an apology. I heard about your engagement from Ellie, he'd written. Congratulations. I've been in rehab for 2 months. Turns out I have a gambling addiction and alcohol dependency. Not saying this excuses anything, but I'm trying to understand why I've been such a mess. Just wanted you to know I'm working on myself. No expectations. I showed the message to Lauren, who read it with measured optimism. It's a start, she said cautiously. If he's serious. That's the big if. I agreed. I didn't respond immediately, taking time to process this potential turning point with Dr. Phillips. Cautious optimism is appropriate, she advised. Real change is possible but takes consistent effort over time. Eventually, I sent a simple reply. Congratulations on rehab. That takes courage. Our exchange didn't lead to immediate reconciliation, nor did I expect it to. Real healing couldn't be rushed or forced. But it opened a door that had seemed permanently closed, not to resume old patterns, but to potentially build something healthier if Trevor's changes proved genuine. My parents, by contrast, remained entrenched in their narrative of victimhood. Christmas cards sent to mutual acquaintances detailed their struggles and heartbreak, without acknowledgement of the behaviors that had led to our estrangement. When Lauren and I announced our engagement on social media, they left passive-aggressive comments that friends quickly deleted. Some people can't change, Lauren observed after one particularly vitriolic message was reported and removed. They're too invested in their version of reality. I had come to accept this truth. My parents' inability to recognize their role in our estrangement wasn't my burden to bear. I could acknowledge the grief of losing that relationship without taking responsibility for its breakdown. As Lauren and I planned our wedding, we made conscious decisions about family involvement. Her parents, warm and supportive people who had welcomed me without reservation, would play traditional roles. Select cousins and relatives who had maintained respectful boundaries during the conflict would be invited. My parents and Trevor would not, a decision that caused some discomfort among extended family but which we knew was necessary for our well-being. Family isn't just blood, I explained to a well-meaning aunt who pushed for reconciliation. It's people who respect and support each other, even through disagreements. This philosophy guided our wedding planning and, more importantly, our vision for our future family. We discussed children, agreeing that any kids we might have would grow up understanding healthy boundaries and unconditional but not enabling love. They'll never wonder if our love is contingent on their success or usefulness, Lauren promised as we discussed parenting philosophies. And they'll never be compared to siblings or made to feel responsible for others' happiness, I added, naming specific patterns I was determined not to repeat. One unexpected development came through a letter from my mother's cousin Judith, who had remained neutral during the family conflict. Your situation brought back difficult memories, she wrote. Your grandfather established that trust with specific provisions because of how your grandmother's family had exploited her financially. History repeated itself despite his best efforts to prevent it. This revelation provided context I'd never had. My grandfather's restrictions weren't arbitrary but based on family patterns he had witnessed firsthand. In trying to protect family assets, he had recognized vulnerabilities that manifested again a generation later. We inherit more than genes, Dr. Phillips noted when I shared this insight. Family patterns perpetuate unless someone consciously breaks the cycle. Breaking that cycle became my focus as Lauren and I built our life together. When we purchased a larger condo in a neighborhood with excellent schools, we made financial decisions with transparency and mutual respect. When I received another promotion, we celebrated without comparison to others' achievements. We practiced the healthy family dynamics we hope to eventually model for children. The scar on my temple faded further but never disappeared completely, a permanent reminder of where boundaries had been violently crossed and the strength I'd found to establish new ones. I no longer covered it with careful hairstyling but accepted it as part of my story. 6 months after Trevor's initial message, he reached out again, having completed rehab and maintained sobriety. Our communications remained cautious but gradually increased in frequency and depth. He found steady work as a barista, enrolled in community college courses, and began addressing the damage his behavior had caused various relationships. "I don't expect forgiveness," he told me during our first in-person meeting in nearly 2 years, a brief coffee at a neutral location with Lauren present. "I just want you to know I'm trying to be better." It wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation with tearful hugs and instant healing. Real life rarely provides such neat resolutions. But it was a beginning, a possible path toward a different kind of relationship based on accountability rather than entitlement. My parents remained unable to acknowledge their role in what happened. The monthly trust distributions continued providing basic support, but our personal estrangement remained complete. I had accepted that some relationships cannot be salvaged when fundamental respect is absent. The lessons from this painful chapter shaped my approach to all relationships. I learned that true love doesn't demand sacrifice of your well-being. That generosity freely given differs fundamentally from resources extracted through manipulation. That sometimes the healthiest family we can have is the one we choose and build rather than the one we're born into. As I sit here now, looking at the wedding band on my finger and the home Lauren and I have created, I understand that the greatest victory wasn't selling my parents' house or establishing the trust restrictions. It was breaking the cycle of dysfunction that had defined my family for generations. The journey wasn't one I would have chosen, but the destination, this life of authentic connections and healthy boundaries, has been worth every painful step. What's your story? Have you ever had to make difficult decisions to protect yourself from family? Did you struggle with guilt afterward? Share your experience in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more perspectives on family dynamics and personal growth. Remember that establishing boundaries isn't selfish. It's often the most loving thing you can do for yourself and ultimately for others. Thank you for listening. And may you find the courage to create healthy relationships in your own life.